The woman was already stomping across the gravel before I even got out of my truck. Her heels clicked like gunshots on the old stone path, and her perfectly lacquered nails clutched a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Excuse me," she barked. "You can't just park there, it's private property." I shut the truck door and adjusted my hat. "Ma'am, I own this property," she blinked. "Oh no, you don't. This ranch is within the jurisdiction of the Oak Hollow Homeowners Association. I'm Angela Faircroft, president of the HOA, and you're trespassing." I laughed. Not because I thought she was joking, but because I couldn't believe how confidently wrong she was. "This ranch has been in my family for over 150 years, I said. "I just inherited it after my uncle passed. Name's Trevor Jennings." Angela stiffened. "That may be so, but you still have to follow our covenants. We have rules about fencing, livestock," and she scanned my truck like it offended her personally. "Unauthorized vehicles." I looked over the split-rail fence my great-great-grandfather had built by hand. The cattle out in the field hadn't changed much since the Civil War. The only thing new here was Angela and her clipboard. "You're mistaken," I said flatly. "This land predates your HOA by a century and a half. It's not part of any subdivision." Angela's lips curled into something between a sneer and a fake smile. "We recently voted to annex the surrounding properties for beautification purposes. Your land is now within Oak Hollow's extended boundary. You can't just vote to absorb someone's private land." She flipped through her clipboard like she was looking for a loophole she'd scribbled down. "Actually, we can. The association purchased the wooded lots adjacent to your eastern boundary, and that gave us jurisdiction to expand." I took a slow step toward her. "You do realize what you're doing is illegal, right?" Her voice got haughtier. "You clearly don't understand how HOAs work." "We have legal counsel. You'll be receiving a fine for non-compliance. That barn roof alone violates 3 ordinances." I could feel my jaw tightening, but I stayed calm. "Look, Angela, I'm not just some guy with a cowboy hat and a deed. I'm the governor of this state." She blinked again. This time much slower. "You're, what? Governor Trevor Jennings, sworn in last January. You might have missed the news while you were busy policing lawn gnomes." The clipboard trembled just a little in her hands, but Angela wasn't the type to back down. "Well, governor or not, you'll be hearing from our legal team. You can't just ignore the rules like some outlaw." I turned and walked toward the porch, boots crunching on the gravel, and tossed back. "Then I guess I'll be waiting for that letter." Right next to the fireplace where I burn junk mail. Behind me, I heard her furious huff, followed by the sharp snap of her heels retreating down the path. I knew she wasn't done. She was the type who'd rather dig a deeper hole than admit she was wrong. And I had a feeling she'd be back with trouble. But what she didn't know was that I had cameras, documents, and a legal team of my own. And I wasn't going to let a power-hungry HOA president strong-arm her way onto my family's land. Not a chance. By the following morning, I had 3 things. A fresh pot of black coffee, the original surveyor's map dating back to 1873, and a phone call from my state attorney general, who also happened to be an old college buddy. He laughed harder than I'd heard in years when I told him about Angela's little annexation fantasy. "She really said that?" he choked out. "Word for word," I said. "She thinks she can expand HOA borders like she's building a theme park," he whistled. "You want me to send someone from the land registry to set her straight?" "Not yet. Let's give her a little more rope. I've got cameras up on the fence posts. Let's see how far she wants to push this." I hung up and walked out onto the porch, where the sun was just starting to slice through the mist rolling off the meadow. The cattle were calm, the barn cats were sunning themselves on the railing, and everything felt exactly like it should until I saw the white SUV creeping down the gravel. Angela was back. And she'd brought 2 men in polo shirts and khakis who looked like they'd been plucked straight from a strip mall security convention. One of them was carrying a measuring wheel. The other had a drone case. I met them halfway down the path. "We're conducting a topographic inspection," Angela announced before I could say a word. "We'll need access to your back pasture." "I don't think so." Her voice climbed a notch. "We have every right." Article 16 of our updated charter allows for environmental assessments in pre-approved zones. Pre-approved by whom? The board. The board doesn't have jurisdiction here. One of the khaki twins popped open the drone case and started assembling it like he was prepping for a military op. The other rolled the measuring wheel 5 feet across my gravel and began writing on a clipboard. I waved a hand at the camera mounted on the fence post. "That's 2 counts of trespassing, 1 unauthorized surveillance device, and a violation of state privacy statutes." Angela narrowed her eyes. "You're bluffing." I pointed toward the ridge behind the pasture. "There's a fiber line buried under that hill. Runs to a state-owned wildlife monitoring station. That land is protected. You fly that drone over it and you're looking at a federal charge." One of the polo shirts froze mid-assembly. Angela's face twitched. "You're just trying to intimidate us." "No, I'm giving you a chance to leave before you make things worse." The man with the wheel hesitated, then turned back toward the SUV. The drone guy followed, muttering under his breath. Angela lingered. She looked at the land like it owed her something. "You think you're above the rules, but I know your type. You think status puts you beyond consequence. It doesn't." I leaned in slightly. "You're right. That's why I follow the law. And that's also why I know when someone else is breaking it." She didn't answer. She just climbed into the SUV and slammed the door. I walked back to the porch and flipped on the monitor hooked to the cameras. The footage was crystal clear. Every word, every step, every illegal act documented. That evening, I drove into town. I needed to pay a visit to someone who might know more about what Angela had been up to before she came knocking on my land. Darla worked at the records office and had lived in Oak Hollow since long before it had a name. Her desk was piled with file folders, a half-knitted scarf, and a ceramic mug that read, "I can't fix stupid, but I can file it." When I told her what happened, she didn't look surprised. "She's gotten bold," Darla muttered. Last month, she tried to fine the Thompsons for planting wildflowers on their own lot, claimed it disrupted the aesthetic continuity of the neighborhood. Has she ever tried expanding HOA territory before? Darla pushed her glasses up and pulled open a drawer. She's been lobbying the county zoning board every quarter, wants to redraw the rural boundary lines so she can classify more land as community adjacent. I raised an eyebrow. "Is that even a legal term?" "Not in any book I've ever read," she said, "but she's persistent." Got a few of the board members in her pocket, too. Word is she's been offering beautification grants in exchange for votes. Kickbacks. Darla didn't answer, but her look said enough. I asked for copies of the zoning requests, and she handed over a file thick enough to stop a bullet. "Be careful, Trevor. She's not just petty, she's strategic, and she plays dirty." On the way back to the ranch, I got a call from my chief of staff. "You're going to want to see this," he said. "Angela Faircroft just filed a complaint with the State Ethics Commission. Says you threatened her in a private dispute. Did she include the part where she trespassed and tried to map my land with a drone? Nope, but the footage you sent me already has timestamps. We'll handle it." I pulled into the driveway just as dusk fell. The porch light kicked on. A folder sat at the top step. No name, no note, just a thin manila envelope sealed with a red sticker. Inside were photographs. A series of them taken with a telephoto lens. My house, my truck, me stepping out of the barn. Some were snapped from across the ridge. I checked the camera logs. Nothing showed anyone approaching the porch. They knew the blind spot. I walked the perimeter twice that night, flashlight in hand, boots crunching softly against the grass. The cattle stirred but didn't panic. Nothing else moved. At sunrise, I met with a local deputy I trusted, Ramirez, an Army vet who'd once worked cybercrime in Dallas before moving out here for the quiet life. He studied the photos with a practiced eye. "These weren't taken on a phone. This is professional-grade lens work. Someone's been watching you. Think it's HOA related." He tapped the edge of the photo. "Looks like surveillance, but not the sloppy kind. This is someone who knows what they're doing." I handed him the footage of the drone team. They had no warrant, no authorization. Think we've got enough for a criminal trespass charge? Absolutely. And if they cross that ridge line, we can loop in the feds. I nodded. Let's make it official. I want a record started. He pulled out a notepad. You want me to bring them in? Not yet. Let them think I'm still playing nice. But if they so much as cross that fence again, I want them in cuffs before they make it back to the road. That afternoon, I set up 2 new cameras, ones with thermal detection and motion tracking. I also installed a pressure sensor under the gravel by the gate. Anyone trying to sneak up would leave a digital footprint. I wasn't just defending my land anymore, I was uncovering something filthy. Angela wasn't just overstepping authority. She was building a shadow network of influence, using HOA power to manipulate zoning laws, collect off-the-books payments, and intimidate landowners into compliance. And now, for the first time, she'd picked the wrong target. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to expose everything. The first real crack opened when I received a call from a woman named Evelyn Greaves. Her voice carried the weight of too many sleepless nights, the kind of voice that gets used to being ignored. She said she used to own a small property tucked between 2 of the new development lots Angela had beautified last spring. She didn't mince words. They forced me off my land, she said, told me it was condemned, that the county approved demolition. I didn't have the money to fight it. I asked a few questions. She answered each with specific dates and names, then she paused. You're the first person I've told this to who didn't hang up. I told her to meet me at the courthouse. Not the flashy state building in the capital, but the old brick one in the center of town, where the floors still creaked and the records clerk still hand-stamped every document. She showed up early, wore a faded denim jacket and carried a battered leather folder that looked older than I was. Inside it were photographs before and after shots. Her little farmhouse with a red door and ivy curling up the porch rail. Then, a month later, just rubble. The demolition notice had no county seal. In fact, it was written on Oak Hollow HOA letterhead, signed by a compliance director who, when I ran the name, didn't exist in any public record. I took the folder, thanked her, and promised I'd look into it. But I already knew this wasn't an isolated case. Back at the ranch, I called Ramirez again. I need you to run a list of all properties acquired by Oak Hollow over the last 2 years. Look for foreclosures, condemnations, demolitions, anything that didn't go through official county channels. He whistled low. You think they've done this more than once? I think Evelyn is just the first person brave enough to talk. He said it would take a day, maybe 2. I told him I'd wait. That night I got a visitor, not a stranger. James Lorne, former city planner, showed up unannounced just after 9. He was dressed too sharp for a casual visit, but his hands shook when he handed me a sealed envelope. I was on the zoning board until Angela had me ousted, he said. She pressured 3 of us to approve boundary expansions. I refused. Next meeting, they voted me out on a conflict of interest, said I had financial ties to a landscaping company. I've never even owned a lawnmower. I opened the envelope. Inside were internal memos, copies of emails and budget requests from Angela marked for beautification project phase 4. One caught my eye, a requisition for a private security firm, not local deputies. These were contractors, the same polo-shirted guys who had tramped across my land. She's building a private enforcement arm, I said, half to myself. James nodded. They've been going door to door. Not just harassing people, intimidating them. I know of at least 5 families who sold below market value after repeated fines and warnings. And none of it reported. They were scared, still are. I handed him a glass of water and told him to stay in town for a few days. The next day, Ramirez called back. I pulled every property transfer associated with Oak Hollow, 17 in 2 years. Of those, 9 were flagged as condemned, but the county has no record of official inspections or health violations. And the demolition crews, all subcontracted through a shell company registered in Nevada. No local licensing, no permits. I let that sink in. Send everything you have to the Attorney General's office, mark it urgent. He paused. You think this is going federal? It already is. I didn't wait. I drove straight to the state capitol, bypassing my usual schedule. I met with the AG in his office, shut the door, and laid down everything: Evelyn's folder, James's documents, Ramirez's findings. He didn't need convincing. This is racketeering, he said. Housing fraud, abuse of power, coercion, probably money laundering if those shell companies are real. Then let's move, he nodded. We'll need to coordinate with state police and the U.S. Attorney's Office, but I want this airtight. 3 days later, Evelyn called again. Her voice was different this time, not scared, furious. They're watching me, she said. There's a black SUV parked across from my sister's place, same one that followed me to the grocery store yesterday. I told her to pack a bag and drive to the ranch. I had state troopers stationed at my gate now and thermal sensors mapped to my phone. She'd be safer here than anywhere else. She arrived just before sunset, shaken but composed. I gave her the guest room near the back where the windows overlooked the creek. She didn't say much, just thanked me and asked if the door locked from the inside. That night I met with Ramirez and 2 investigators from the AG's office. We reviewed the drone footage, the trespass logs, the property fraud reports. Then we laid out the plan. They needed something incontrovertible. A live violation. A catch in the act moment. I had an idea. We prepped the eastern edge of the property near the ridge. I placed a small utility trailer there just visible from the road. I left it unlocked and parked a truck beside it with a fake invoice taped to the windshield, marked Survey Equipment Drop Site. Then we waited. 2 nights later, motion sensors triggered at 1:30 in the morning. The cameras caught 2 figures in dark clothing, no lights, moving across the fence line. One held a crowbar. The other carried a small bag I recognized from drone ops. Within moments, the troopers swept in silent, coordinated. The 2 were cuffed and read their rights before they even understood what hit them. Turns out they weren't just HOA contractors. One had a record breaking and entering insurance fraud. The other had worked for a private property reclamation firm in Arizona that had been shut down for illegal evictions. Angela was losing her grip. When the arrests made the morning news, she spun a press release claiming the men were rogue enforcers acting without HOA authorization. Problem was, their paychecks came from the same Nevada shell company linked to her requisitions. James confirmed the signature. Evelyn recognized one of them as the man who handed her the fake condemnation notice. The AG's office moved fast after that. Warrants were issued. Bank accounts frozen. Angela's house was raided and her personal laptop seized. Investigators found encrypted files, photos of properties marked with red X's, and a spreadsheet titled Reclaim Targets Q3. She was arrested the next morning charged with conspiracy, fraud, racketeering, and unlawful surveillance. The charges kept stacking as more evidence poured in, but the damage wasn't just legal. The HOA board crumbled. The vice president resigned after emails surfaced showing he'd purchased 2 of the condemned homes at a fraction of their value. The treasurer vanished entirely, last seen boarding a flight to Belize. I held a press conference on the courthouse steps not as governor but as landowner. I didn't invoke titles. I didn't gloat. I just laid out the facts. This was never about property lines. It was about control. About power being used as a weapon against the people it was meant to protect. That ends today. People clapped. Some cried. Evelyn stood in the front row, arms crossed, eyes locked on mine with a quiet kind of gratitude. That afternoon, the county zoning board reversed every annexation Angela had pushed. The properties were returned to their previous designations. Those who had lost land would be compensated, and the Oak Hollow HOA dissolved by court order. Permanently. The ranch was quiet again by the end of the week. Just the wind in the grass, the low bellow of cattle, and the faint buzz of cicadas. I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee watching the sun drop behind the ridge. No SUVs, no drones, just peace. Evelyn stepped out beside me, wrapped in a light shawl. She didn't say anything at first, then, softly, "Thank you." I didn't answer, just gave a small nod and kept my eyes on the horizon, because some things don't need words, justice is one of them. The week after Angela's arrest, the fallout spread like a brush fire. I kept my boots on and my schedule clear. The ranch had become a kind of gathering place for those who'd been burned by Oak Hollow's power games, and I wasn't about to send them away. Not when the full scope of what Angela and her board had done was still unraveling. A man named Curtis showed up first. Tall, lean, and quiet, he parked his truck at the edge of the property and waited until I waved him up. He took off his hat and said, "I used to be a county appraiser." I motioned to the porch. Used to be, he dropped into the old rocking chair like he hadn't sat in days. Angela had me reassigned after I flagged discrepancies in the property valuations. Some of the homes she acquired were listed at half market value. When I brought it up, I got a call from someone in the zoning office telling me to back off. Next week, I was moved to another district. I asked who made the call. He gave me a name I didn't recognize. That night, I ran it past the Attorney General's task force. Turns out the name belonged to a contractor who'd been brought in as a consultant during Oak Hollow's expansion review. No credentials, no certifications, just a trail of shell companies and post office boxes. The next day, a mother and her teenage son arrived. The boy had a sling on his arm. She didn't ask to sit. She just stood on the gravel and said, "They shut off our water for 3 days. Said we were behind on HOA dues, but I'd paid, I had proof." I asked what happened after that. My son tried to reconnect the line himself. Slipped, broke his arm. They said it was our fault for tampering with community utilities. She handed me a USB drive. I recorded the whole thing, the threats, the lies. I didn't know where to go until I saw what you did. I passed it to the investigators the same afternoon. They were already building a timeline. The new evidence pushed them to file additional charges, this time for negligent harm and utility fraud. That evening, I drove out to the border of what used to be Oak Hollow. The community signs had been removed by court order, but the damage was still visible. Lawns overseeded with gravel to comply with drought aesthetics, fences torn down for obstructing natural sightlines, and entire lots stripped of foliage because native plants attracted pests. An elderly couple stood outside their home, loading potted plants into the back of a van. I asked if they needed help. The man looked up and said, "We're leaving, sold to a family out east, we're too tired to fight anymore." I nodded and didn't try to change their minds. Not everyone had the stomach for justice. Some just wanted peace. Back at the ranch, Ramirez brought something unexpected. A flash drive recovered from Angela's desktop. It was encrypted, but the AGS tech team cracked it the same day. Inside were audio recordings, dozens of them. Angela had been recording every board meeting, every zoning call, every backroom deal. It was more than a smoking gun, it was a wildfire. One clip caught my attention. A conversation between Angela and someone listed only as D. Angela, "We'll push the next 3 lots into acquisition. If they don't comply, we'll issue maintenance liens and let the clock run out." D. "You sure the county won't intervene, Angela?" "They won't see a thing. I've got the inspector on payroll. We tag the properties as health hazards. Mold, vermin, whatever it takes." D. "And once we own them, Angela, we resell under a new LLC, strip the record clean. You get your return, I get the control." The AGS office froze all property transfers retroactively. Every lot acquired under Angela's tenure was flagged for investigation. Several were already being returned to their original owners. The man listed as D turned out to be a real estate developer from out of state. He'd funneled nearly $2 million into Oak Hollow through shell corporations. He was arrested stepping off a plane in Phoenix. By the end of the week, The legal team had compiled enough evidence to charge the former HOA board members with conspiracy to commit fraud, falsifying government documents, unlawful surveillance, malicious property interference, and extortion. Over 20 indictments were handed down. Angela's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal. The AG declined. The trial was fast-tracked, given the public outrage. Courtrooms filled with residents, journalists, even a few state senators who wanted to see for themselves what unchecked HOA power could do. Evelyn testified first. Calm, composed, and devastatingly clear. They told me my home was worthless, that letting it stand was a disservice to the neighborhood. They made me feel like I was the problem. The jury listened to every word. Then came James, Curtis, the mother with the injured son, and others whose names I hadn't even known yet. Each voice added a layer to the story, not just of corruption, but of calculated cruelty. Angela sat motionless through most of it. Her attorney whispered frequently, but she kept her eyes forward. When the audio recordings were played, she flinched once. That was all. It took the jury less than 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled 2 weeks later. She faced decades in prison not just for what she'd done, but for how long she'd done it without remorse. Meanwhile, the state legislature drafted a new bill, one I helped shape personally. It would place all HOAs under state oversight, require annual audits, cap fine amounts, and ban annexation of properties without unanimous consent from landowners. It passed unanimously. Back at the ranch, I hosted a cookout. Not a political event, just neighbors, families, and folks who'd been through the fire. The grill sizzled, kids ran through the fields, and someone brought a guitar. Curtis handed me a small wooden sign he'd carved himself. Burned into the grain were the words, "This land stands free." I hung it on the porch beam before the sun went down. Later that night, I walked the fence line alone, just to see if the quiet had returned. It had no trucks, no flashlights, no strangers lurking in the brush. The air was still. The stars were out, and the land, my family's land, was exactly where it belonged, untouched, unbroken, home.